What's up, guys? It's George from Team Starlight here today with another episode of This Deck Cooks. So this is one that I've been working on for a while now that I call Dark Hero Frogs. This is a variant of Hero Frogs that is inspired by two other builds in the format, one being Diva Hero and the other being Junk Frogs. So we're going to go into the deck profile. We'll talk about where that inspiration comes in, and then we have some gameplay of me playing this exact list at a tournament run at WildCardCyclone, where you can see some of the plays that this deck can make that maybe like traditional Hero Frogs wouldn't be able to do. So with that being said, let's get straight into the deck profile, starting off with the Frogs. We've got, of course, 3 Subzitone, 2 Swap, 2 Treeborn, 2 Dupe, and Unifrog. So we're only playing 2 Swap in this build. I'm actually an advocate for running 3 in traditional Hero Frogs, but what we've done is we've taken out 1 Swap Frog and replaced it with another monster that I would consider to be like a good starter or a normal summon that you'd want to open with. And that way we're keeping the same ratio of normal summons that you would get in traditional Hero Frogs. This deck, you'll also find it can play without Frog access very easily. So we'll be able to look at like clips of not seeing any Frogs, which makes it, in my opinion, okay to run just the 2 swaps. But everything else, pretty standard, just running these 10. For the hero package, we have 1 Stratos, 1 Ocean, and this is where the main inspiration came from, is the 2 copy of Mali. So I was already playing 2 Mali in my Hero Frog build, and I always liked that it would make your discard traps really good. It makes your 1-for-1 really strong. But obviously it has this downside where if you draw into the second one, it becomes this brick card in your hand. So this build tries to fix that issue as much as it can. So it justifies running it over something like Alias or Infernal Prodigy. These two are obviously standard. I've been going back and forth between playing 4 or 5 heroes, but I decided to cut down to these 4 just because the 5th hero, it never really found a good place in the deck. It always felt like there was something that made it weaker than these 4. And I've opted to take out that 5th hero because we have so many ways to get access to these 4 to set up Miracle Fusions that you wouldn't normally be able to do in regular Hero Frogs. And everything else is pretty normal with these 4. Where the deck gets a little bit more interesting is in the secondary warrior package. So along with these 4 heroes, we're playing 1 Grepher, 2 Junk Synchron, 1 Necrogardna, and for our extra darks, we're playing 1 Plague Spreader and 1 Dark Arm Dragon. So this is where you can start to see some of the inspiration from Diva Hero with like the Grepher, Plague Spreader, Malicious combo. And initially, when I was looking at Diva Hero list, I found that one of the reasons why I think the deck is so good is because, similar to Vayu Turbo, you get to play these really powerful limited cards in the format, like Dark Arm Dragon, Plague Spreader, even Necrogardna is really good in this deck for protection that doesn't clog up your back row. So when I was already playing the Malis, I found that I wasn't missing that many pieces to make it so this deck could functionally try to do the same thing as Diva Hero with the combo potential, running all these really powerful limited cards. So Grepher's been really good. Junk Synchron, we're playing 2 copies. This is what the 5th hero used to be. And I just found that when I was playing cards like Malicious Edge, I liked having like a searchable, like kind of pseudo Monarch. And Junk Synchron fits that role, but it's also a dark, which is super relevant. Obviously, it's just a really good card in Frogs. And this was the initial inspiration, was from seeing Junk Frogs, which if you haven't seen, it's essentially Frogs that plays 3 copies of Junk Synchron. You get a bunch of +1s with Swap Frog, just bouncing Junk Synchron back. You go into a bunch of synchro plays. But the main reason why people liked it is because you get to play cards like Dark Arm Dragon. So I always thought that was really cool. The main downside that I found with Junk Frogs that we talk about in our tier list with Raunik on the channel is that Junk Synchron, if you don't get Frog access, you can't play the game because your monarchs aren't live and junk synchron can't go into synchro plays. So if you're not seeing the frogs in your opening hand, it leads to you just not doing anything, and sometimes you just lose the game that way. And it's also a card that is a little bit weaker to deck devy, because if you're playing 3 junk synchron, games 2 and 3, when you're expecting to see deck devy come in, you can't really afford to take all 3 copies out, because then your deck doesn't do what it's supposed to. As opposed to this build, if you just take out the junk synchrons against Value Turbo, the deck still plays exactly like Hero Frogs. So it's a lot more resilient into like side decking. But besides that, I found like these cards are just really powerful. Plague Spreader is really good to use. Obviously with Mali, it's able to unbrick the second Mali in your hand. If you draw into the second one, you can stack it to the top of the deck, bring out Plague, and then special summon Mali from the deck that you top decked with Plague Spreader. And it essentially turns a dead draw into an 8-star synchro, which is really, really good. But everything else is just super, super strong in this deck. You have the 4 heroes and the additional darks here, and that's kind of the main spice. But besides this, we're obviously running 3 Caius. We're not playing Rise in this build. The fact that it's not a dark is really relevant. Same reason why we're not playing Malicious Edge. It's not a dark that sets up Dark Arm. You can't use it for Grepher or Allure. And because of that, it just has less synergies. And you'll find that when you play this deck, between 3 Caius, 2 Junk Synchron, Plague Spreader, Dark Arm, 3 Miracle Fusions, any of your power spells like Brain Control or Enemy Controller, you have like more than enough ways to go for like these huge pushes, to where I've never felt the need to run the 4th Monarch with Ryza. It's never really come up where I felt like I needed it more than like Dark Arm Dragon. So just the 3 Monarchs has been really good. And then our last 2 darks, we have 1 Gores, 1 Fader. Obviously these are just both really good. The fact that Fader is a dark is relevant. It's good in the specific matchups. I find if I'm playing like against Value Turbo or Black Wings, where it's worse into like main deck oppression or deck devy, I'll just choose to pitch this card off of like Grepher or Allure and just try not to get greedy using it. But it's still really good into like Light Sworns, Gladiator Beast. It's really good into the FROG matchup where it can just swing games by itself. So that's the whole monster count. It's 13 darks. When I was looking at Diva Hero, one thing that I was trying to keep in mind was the ratio of dark monsters, and I found that in most builds, like Oscars, I think ran 13 darks. Usually Diva Hero runs like 12 to 14 on the higher side if they're playing like a zombie engine. But that's why it was really important for me to make sure that I hit 13 darks or around that range when I was making this build, just to make sure that your like Dark Armed and your Allure are live more often. But that's it for the monsters. Getting into the spells, we have 3 Miracle Fusions and Future Fusion, which is super, super good since you play Mali. We're not playing Dandelion in this build, similar to why we don't play Ryza. It's just not a dark, so it doesn't set up plays with Dark Arm Dragon. You can't use it for Allure or Grepher. And for that reason, I found that you want to send Mali most of the time with Future Fusion anyways, because it does a few things for you. So sending Mali gets you 1 dark closer for Dark Armed. It also makes your Plague Spreader live. So if you send Mali for Future Fusion and normal summon Plague, you can get like a Stardust Dragon out to protect the Future Fusion, which is a really good opening. But it's also able to still go into like stuff like dupe locks. So you don't get the extra +1 that you would get with Dandelion, but I find that for the consistency that it gives you, it is usually better to send Mali anyways. And yeah, it just makes a lot more sense in this build to run that instead of Dandelion, just because it kind of solves the same functional reasoning why you put Dandelion in. So running those, your 2 power spells, Rhoda 1-for-1. Rhoda's really good in this deck because you play all these new targets. So you can search for Stratos, Ocean, both Junk Synchrons, Grepher, and Necrogardener, and it's pretty much always able to get you whatever piece you're missing from your hand. So oftentimes I'll have hands where I just don't have frogs at all, and I'll just choose to get Greffer because I have like a Dark Arm that I want to get live. So super, super good. Obviously with 1-for-1, Rhoda is really powerful. One of your best openings is to get Stratos access, search for Malicious, pitch the Malicious with 1-for-1 to get Subzitoad on board, and then use Mally's effect to get Mally, start going into a dupe block. You can use Swap Frog to bounce the Stratos back to your hand if you want to get an extra +1. Otherwise, Stratos plus 1-for-1 usually lets you end on like dupe Uni or just dupe Subzitoad. So both really, really powerful cards, of course. And then you run a bunch of other power spells. So 1 Allure, 1 Econ, Brain Con, Heavy, and MST. Allure, obviously, any deck or any card that lets you draw in Frogs is going to be really good, like Upstart and Reckless. That's why they've become so popular. Because you get to thin out your card or your deck like 10 cards with Subzitoad, and then you get to draw 2, which is basically guaranteed to be like some type of power card. So Allure is really good. Econ and Brain Con are really nice. Obviously, Econ is great because you play the extra tuners. So you have the 2 Junk Synchrons, Plague Spreader. So even though you play less conversions with the Monarchs, you still have a lot of ways to make use of Econ, Brain Con, of course, and then Heavy MST. This deck is really fragile to Oppression sometimes, so maining the MST feels too important to cut. But that's a spell lineup for traps. We play 3 Raigeki Break, just keeping it really simple. 1 Dust Shoot, and then my favorite card in this entire deck is Return. It overperformed in testing. It's, I think, the best card in the deck. You'll see in some of the gameplay, but this is just a card that people, first of all, will never play around because it just doesn't exist in Frogs unless it's this specific build. And it's very easy to set up. So you have your Dark Arm banishing cards, you have Allure banishing from your hand, Necro, Plague, Mally, they all banish off their own effects. So it's really easy to get like an already banished Mally Plague, and then you can bring them back with Return, go into another Synchro play, put the Plague back, go into a third Synchro play. So that's obviously really strong. Any of your Miracle Fusions make this live, and you can bring back cards like Stratos and Subzitoad and then use their effects, which is super broken. But what I find this card to be the most useful at is games 2 and 3. Your opponent is going to be siding in cards like Kaiku or Soul Release, where they're trying to actively banish your graveyard, and this just becomes a huge punish for those types of plays. So I've had people where they'll go like Soul Release or they'll Kaiku me, and they'll be in a position where they feel like they can't lose because they've just banished my entire graveyard and they have something like a Kaiku on board. And the next turn I just go Return and get a free game shot. And even if you don't win that turn, most of the time you can convert all 5 cards. So if you're bringing back Swap Frog, you can like bounce Caius's back to your hand. You can tribute stuff off Subzitoad. You can go into Synchro plays. So it is really, really powerful. And it's one of the reasons why I think this deck is so good. And you'll see that in the gameplay when we get into it. But that's the deck list. It's 41 cards, which just means that you draw double Mally slightly less, which is nice. But moving into the side deck, it's pretty simple. You just have like the staple Hero Frog side card. So 2 Vanity, 2 Crow, and Breaker. The only thing to note is that I think all of these need to be darks, because when you're siding out, it makes it really awkward when you take out like both Junk Synchrons and Fader, and you're putting in cards like Snowman Eater and Cyber Dragons, because it just forces you to take out cards like Dark Armed and Allure, since you're not putting in the same ratio of darks. So when you do make your side deck strategy, I think it's important if you take out 2 darks, you put 2 darks in. Otherwise, consider cutting Dark Armed and Allure and also signing those cards out. So that's the only thing about those 5. We're playing 1 Lightning Vortex. So this is the only Frog Monarch deck that doesn't use Soul Exchange. And I decided to use Lightning Vortex instead because I found Soul Exchange to be less useful in this deck when you don't have as many ways to convert it. So Econ is really good because you can steal monsters and then synchro off of them, but you obviously can't do that with Soul Exchange. So your only real ways to convert them is like with Subzitoad and Caius. And I just found Lightning Vortex, especially in this meta where there's a lot more combo decks, has been a little bit more useful. Then we have the traps, 3 Dust Tornado. Like I said, this deck is a lot more fragile to oppression than I expected it to be. So playing 3 Dust Tornado, so if I see any floodgates, I can just deal with them, to me is like really important. These plus Breaker, I'll pretty much always put in against like Vayu Turbo or Blackwings, and that's basically it. So that's why we're running 3. Then we have some protection, 2 Deep Prisons, just generically good cards to put into a lot of aggro matchups. Like, not a whole lot to say. I think it's become a little bit more common. I think 2 is a really good ratio, and I really like playing these 2 in this deck. And then just a couple other like niche cards, Karma Cut, Deck Devi, a little bit more specific than Deep Prison, but Karma Cut is really good into like the Frog matchup. It's just good at being able to like banish cards from the field and graveyard. It's good against machines, Light Sworns, and speaking of Light Sworns, Deck Devi is really, really good into like the Christia decks that play a lot of like Herald and Fairies and other like little guys that you want to hit with Deck Devi. But yeah, they're just a little bit more niche, but they're both very, very powerful. And Deck Devi is very easy to set up when you play so many darks, like Dark Arm, Junk Synchron, going into Catastor, any synchros you make with like Plague Spreader. So it's live very, very often. And then the last 2, Mirror Force Torrential. I would main these if I could find space. Like, I think you could just as easily throw these into the main deck and just run 43, but a part of my brain just doesn't like the idea of running 43 cards, so I just have them in the side. They're both very good, obviously, so not a whole lot to say there. And then we'll go into the extra deck just because there's a few cards that are different. Obviously, you're playing 3 Ab-Zero. We're not playing Gaia because we don't have Dandy or Malicious Edge. We're playing Armory Arm, 2 Catastors, Junk Warrior, Brio, Goyo, Black Rose, Thought Ruler, Stardust, Colossal, Red Dragon, and Dark End. So mostly standard stuff. We put in a second Catastor over Android because I found having another level 5 Dark is way more relevant than having Android, which almost never is like better than Catastor. And Red Dragon Archfiend is just really good against like Gigavice deck that's come out. It's come up a few times where it's been good going for a game with return. And the main thing is Dark End Dragon in this build is really, really easy to set up with Plague Spreader plus Mali or Plague Spreader plus Caius. So you get to run, again, another really broken limited card in the format by running these specific cards. So that's it, the whole deck profile. Like I said, we have some gameplay of me playing this exact list at WildCardCyclone. So with that being said, let's get into the footage. So starting off with the first match against George, who's on Diva Hero, I wanted to showcase this match specifically because it goes over one of the points I mentioned where the deck can play without any frog access. So you can see I don't have any way to get Treeborn Frog live, no Swap Frog, but I have Rhoda for Greffer, and I use it to start setting up Malicious. I said Necrogardna, and this is a really nice opener when your opponent doesn't know what you're playing. So he thinks that I'm on like Diva Hero or Vayu or something, which he's also playing. He sets a back row, he passes. Again, you don't have any frog access. I end up going for MST, which was nice because it was torrential, so it was a very real card. But at this point, I'm kind of just thinking I need to play my cards. I want to make use of the Plague Spreader. Because I have Return now, I just want to like get these cards on the field. I want to banish my Mali, get Plague banished. Like, if he can deal with this board, it's fine, because I can just bring all of this stuff back with the Return later. So I'm going for an aggressive push. So I'm definitely putting the Plague Spreader down, going into Stardust, and I'm just going to attack. If he drops Gores, I can Necro one of the attacks potentially, and then have the Kai live. So he goes Mind Control. This is super funny. I also didn't know what he was playing, but he uses the Grepher effect to also pitch his own Mali. And I believe he also sends Necrogardna. So we end up seeing a lot of the same cards, which is kind of silly. So at this point, he thinks we're playing the same deck, which is a huge benefit for me. He also has Plague Spreader. So he ends up summoning Goyo. But I end up having the Necrogardna, which I think he might have forgotten about. Otherwise, I'm sure you would make Brio or something else, right?
Yep, that makes sense. Damn, so still no frog access, but the game goes on. You got Plague. Just set up for Caius.
Yep, so I'm just going to say I'm killing you this turn. He has to use the Necrogardna, and I set everything. I feel really comfortable because I have this Dust Shoot, and it's a little awkward. This Miracle Fusion is going to be live no matter what. Obviously, I need to send back the Diva. I see he has his own return. He doesn't realize I have my return set already. So this is like a little awkward. I don't know, Declan, what you think is like the correct play here. He has Miracle Fusion with the Mali, which I think, I assume that's what he was going to go for, is like make Ab-Zero, try to crash into Stardust. But
yeah,
he
you
ends up
could stack.
stacking.
I'm trying to think if could he use both? No, because you definitely want to set the return. So he probably kept that. Yeah. But you want to resolve the miracle as well. So yeah, I think you had to go for just the miracle play there to try to crash into the Stardust.
Yeah, it's scary with the back row because he probably assumed it was like a discard trap or something, which is why he made Thought Ruler. If it's like Wing Blast, since he thinks I'm on Diva Hero, I think that could be the right play. And then he sets what I know is Gilman. And obviously I have return set. And right now I'm looking through my extra deck. This is my first time doing the POV. So it kind of looks like I'm just staring at the screen, doing nothing.
Now that I think about it, I think George made the right play, the other George, because he doesn't know what you're playing. That's like the biggest pro about what's happening right now. So he could just think you have Stardust with real back row, but it's your turn. We have hindsight benefit. Yeah, we're gonna go for it.
So this should be game. I make Red Dragon Archfiend, which, spoiler alert, is the wrong card to make. This is my first time playing RDA. I didn't read it enough. I thought it destroyed the defense position monster if you just attacked, but you have to attack a defense position monster. But it's game either way because I could also just make Dark End, which would also be enough. And I knew that it was Gilman. So anyways, going to game 2, he's setting 2 back row, 1 monster, and now I see my frogs. He does have Dust Shoot, so I know when he Dust Shooted me, he was like, what is this deck? Because he didn't see any of these frogs, and suddenly I have both Treeborns and Dupe in hand. And this is pretty bad now. So I've just set the Treeborn. I know that he's playing Diva Hero, like he could have Caius, but I have the second Treeborn, and I also have Return. If it gets really bad, I can bring them back. So he tributes, but he sets. So my heart sank for a second, but now I know for sure that's malicious. I do top deck Caius, which is pretty crazy. So end up tributing. No point in using the Heavy Storm. I know that's malicious too, so this is going to be some pretty good damage. He's already at almost half health.
And you don't have to fear pulling the rug because they didn't know you were playing frogs, so just...
Exactly. So I was also wanting to keep the Treeborn off, thinking that he would have to use that back row, but he ends up not using it at all. So now I'm just thinking of trying to push for more damage, summon the Stratos, get Ocean. Obviously, I'm not playing around Torrential because that would have been a perfect moment for him to Caius when I bring out the Caius to play Torrential, but he ends up having Snowman Eater, a card that I was not expecting to see because you normally don't side it against Frogs, but he didn't know I was playing Frogs, right? So it ends up walling off. He mind controls again, and Miracle Fusion's my own Stratos, so that's pretty ugly for me.
Solid play.
Yeah, a really good play. Will put in a lot of work, and then he has Sangan pushing in for damage. Now we're both on equal level now that I draw the Karma Cut, which was my out. So super thankful to see that card. So I'm thinking if I want to play anything, I end up going Heavy Storm, setting. I had to read that it was maybe Dust Tornado because he just wasn't flipping it. So I was like, it's not Torrential, it's not a Battle Trap, it's not Bottomless probably. So that ended up being the right call. Otherwise, I actually might have lost this game if I let that Dust Tornado stick. But I end up Karma Cutting the Ab-Zero. He sets a back row. I still have to deal with his Sangan, but that Rhoda gives me a lot of options. So that's what I mentioned in the deck profile is like, Rhoda is not just going to get you Stratos anymore. It's like I can get so many cards, including Junk Synchron, but I end up just holding on to it, set the Dupe Frog. I'm like, it's going to wall me off from the Sangan at least. He sets a monster, he attacks a Treeborn. I think you just want to leave the Treeborn up, because if he draws Caius, that would actually be pretty good for him to just hit the Treeborn if he wants to. But I have Vanities. It feels a little risky to just bring it out, but I have so many good cards in my hand. I'm just trying to figure out like if I want to bait out that back row. I end up just passing because he's not doing anything to deal with what I have set.
Keep hitting that Treeborn.
Yeah. So he's got
Okay.
another back row. It's a little scary, but I draw the second Vanities, and I'm just like, I know he's playing a combo deck, and I don't want to like die, so I need to start playing some cards.
Ooh.
And Solemn Judgment on the Vanities makes me think this second Vanities is probably just gonna stick.
Yeah, he must be very scared of that Vanities.
So he attacks the set, which ends up being Dupe Frog. And this gets really, really awkward because now I just draw, I bring back the Treeborn, and I'm thinking, like I said, I mean, he solemned one of the Vanities, right? And he's at 1300. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to just bring out the second one, and this should be game. So,
ooh. Very nice.
Game 2 was pretty unfortunate. I drew the right cards, but this is a more interesting match against a deck that I'm not really sure. It's like Recruiters. You'll see. But anyways, we have a really strong
deck.
Yeah. But we've got 1-for-1. We've got Subzitoad, Caius. We have all the like standard Hero Frog stuff. So we're not seeing any of the like Greffer combo cards, but a lot of the time this is enough. This is your ideal hand in most situations. I attack because I want to see if it's like Raikou or something, so I can get this Subzitoad and like make sure my dupe block doesn't get hit. But I end up hitting Shining Angel, so I'm like, oh god, this guy's playing fairies. I go in battle phase, tribute the swap to take Shining Angel. I poke for 14. I just don't want him to get this Recruiter up. And in main 2, I bring out Subzitoad and start going into my dupe block. I can thin out the deck. He doesn't have the Recruiter to be able to like do some weird stuff.
Thankfully, no Herald.
I was a little worried about Herald, because if he had Herald and Christia, that surely would have just been game.
What you gotta do, here, because that was really
Yeah.
solid way to out the recruiter, and now you got the soft lock, so you're gonna keep plussing. T set from him and pass, okay.
Yep. So I've got Subsitoad to get Unifrog. Obviously, or I'm gonna get Dupe Frog first, and then Unifrog. And I need to clear this back row. Obviously, I have 2 Caius, so it's probably fine, but this is just safer. Hit the back row, make sure it's not anything that could deal with his Caius in a weird way. He ends up booking, so that's probably the best case scenario for me because I can just tribute the Unifrog for Caius. Ends up being Mystic Tomato, so I'm like, what is this? What is this deck?
Chaos Recruiters. If you play
Yeah.
Go format, you all know Chaos Recruiters. That's my theory with this deck.
So I end up passing. I feel really good seeing only recruiters. I have my dupe lock up, so he can't crash into this Caius. And then he does another T set and pass. I could get super greedy and just be like, that back row is not real. I'm going to bring out another Caius. But I have like the perfect setup with Raigeki Break and Malicious. And that's kind of why I was saying why I like playing Malicious so much. Because this Raigeki Break would just be really good if it went through. But he has MST to deal with that. And this is where I'm like, okay, I don't, at this point, I don't know anymore. We see Air Bellum. He goes into Black Rose, which is just super ideal for any frog player when you just get 2 cards from dupe. But he has his own way to plus with Avarice. So pretty good for him. I'm actually more happy to see him Avarice and get a plus if it means getting the fairies out of the graveyard. Because I'm still thinking that he might be on Christia. And this is, I actually know exactly what happens. This is a important lesson for any frog players. So I summon Swap and I use its effect to send. I realize I thinned out my entire deck, and most situations, if you're to chill locals, you can like take it back. But if you declare Swap Frog's effect to send, you have to do it. So I end up sending the Treeborn, and it kind of puts me back an entire turn. I swing for 1,000, but the goal was to bounce, swap back, and extra normal the uni to pop this back row. And now he has Air Bellum. So I'm like, man, this could get really ugly if he hits the Caius, which he does. So important lesson.
Just pump faked him a little bit. You just like wanted to make the game closer.
Exactly. So now
Hitting
I end
the
up summoning
Caius is
the
brutal.
Unifrog. Yeah, that was his best case scenario for sure. And I end up going Unifrog, pop the back row. It's bottomless, and I just figured like this is my best play because I can pop the back row and then have some protection from this Air Bellum, so nothing gets discarded. And I go Future Fusion, main 2. I end up sending Mally and Ocean to get them out of the deck. Obviously don't want to draw on those cards, and my hand is very, very bad right now. If I draw into the second Mally and he starts applying more pressure, I could just lose the game. So I need to start fighting back in some way. So he goes Heavy Storm, deals with the Future Fusion. And I'm not sure what else happens this turn, but he summons Tomato. Yeah.
Okay.
This is I'm a little, I thought it was a little questionable, but he summons Black Rose, switches the Treeborn to attack, and does some damage. But it puts the Unifrog on board, and it makes it so he can't set any back row safely. And obviously, you just draw the best card for this situation, which is Miracle Fusion. So a lot of really good top decks, but that's just going to happen when you have Substitute thinning out 10 cards, and then the Future Fusion thinned out the other 2 dead cards with Malleocean. So obviously I'm just going to draw into good cards like this. I'm just going to attack with the Ab-Zero, do a bunch of damage. If he has Gores,
And
it's
this
fine.
also turns on the return, which is just like, that's like the one thing where I'm like, in Hero Frogs in the future, are we just gonna see people play return?
Yeah.
Because like the most popular cards in the format are like Bottomless, Deep Prison in people's trap decks. You run your own miracles, you know, if you run Mally, you start to
Exactly.
tech Plague, like is this gonna, I could see this being like a Hero Frog card of the future, essentially.
Yeah, and you can see how much work it puts in. I end up drawing Brain Control, and I choose to not flip the return because I don't want him to know that I'm playing it, and Brain Control is just a more common card. So I end up not revealing it, which is good, but going into game 2, we've got a T-set pass. And I have a pretty standard hand here. I believe I have Plague Spreader as well. But I go Swap Frog, Send Treeborn, and then I think I'm just going to bounce pass. I'll also say for this deck, because you play Return, it's important to pick out what you're going to Miracle Fusion. So you saw that I Miracle Fusion Swap Frog instead of Substitute, because if the Return gets live and I get like a Caius banished, I want to be able to bounce the Caius back to my hand with Swap Frog. So that's the only thing to keep in mind if you're playing this build. You can't just always banish Substitute with Miracle Fusion. But
Right.
he ends up going DD Warrior Lady. He chooses to banish, which I am okay with. I have everything that I need in my hand, and now I don't have to deal with this DD Warrior Lady. I end up drawing an Allure. And now I'm not sure what the best play is at this point. I'm assuming, because I saw so many recruiters, anytime I see a set monster against this deck, I'm just assuming it's also a recruiter, like a Shining Angel or Mystic Tomato or something. So I just set pass. And it ends up being another DD Warrior Lady. So that was pretty unfortunate. But he chooses to banish again. So I'm feeling like fine. He does have Crow, so everything's getting banished. All my stuff's getting dealt with, but it's trading pretty evenly. And I still have really good cards in my hand. I go Stratos, Effect, to get a +1.
Yeah, I think I appreciate. Oh wow, he has the Herald too, so he's stopping everything. But
Yeah.
I think I appreciate banishing the Plague with DD Warrior Lady, but I don't know about banishing the Dupe Frog. That was the only thing that I was like,
So I end up using the Allure because at this point he's stopped my potential plays, and I need to draw into maybe like something I can do. But he ends up going Nova Summoner, attack. I don't have Treeborn access, but I just draw into one. So at this point, I think the best play is to start getting these frogs out of my hand and just start making some use from it. So I go Swap Frog, effect to send Substitute because I'm basically going to summon the Substitute no matter what. He just heralded the Stratos, and if he has another Herald, I think that puts him at like 0 cards in hand. So I feel pretty safe going into this combo. I also have a read that his back row is probably pulling the rug because every time I would normal summon a monster, he would think. So like when I summoned Swap, he was like, sure. And then I summoned Stratos and he was like, sure. But it ends up being Deep Prison. So it's fine. It's like Dupe Frog against the recruiters is really like all you need. So he can't run over it. He sets another monster, sets a back row passes. I draw into my second Mally, which is lovely.
Dun, dun, dun.
The Plague
this is gonna happen
Spreader's
some
gone.
percentage of the time when you play the Mally.
Exactly. And you try to unbrick it with Plague Spreader and like Greffer, but sometimes you just get the order wrong. But there are still ways that I can make use of it. Immediately, you can go Miracle Fusion and then Tribute for Mally if I want to like deal with these recruiters, but I don't feel the need to do that into a back row. So I end up just summoning Swap Frog. Obviously, if he's not running over this dupe frog, I have no reason to like be worried. I am still a little nervous about Christia, and I definitely don't want him to have 2 monsters on board for like a long time. But he ends up being another DD Warrior Lady. He Raikos the Treeborn.
That's not right.
Yeah, I don't know
Probably
if he
should
knows.
just Raiko the Dupe Frog.
I think he maybe didn't know about like the missing timing, so he might have thought that I was going to search. This is a really funny play I wanted to talk about. So I just said earlier that one of the great things about Grepher is that it can unbrick your double Mallies because you can send Plague and then stack for Plague, getting the other Mally out of your hand, and like it's a cool way to unbrick double Mally. But I don't realize that my stuff has all gotten banished like way earlier on. Like the Plague Spreader's gone, and then I was like, okay, I'll just send Necrogardna. But then the Necrogardna was also gone because I lured it. So I end up just going Grepher, Pitch Mally, and I'm like, I just need to choose which of these is the worst. So I send Fader because I'm thinking if he's on Christia, like he's not going to let me play that Fader, I guess. And I can just attack the Raiko, take him off the Tribute Summon Christia route. But that was a pretty funny misplay. It's just I'm not used to DD Warrior Lady just dealing with all of my stuff that early on, so I just thought that I had the Plague. But he ends up going Avarice. Again, I feel really good about this because it's just taking him off 4 fairies.
Do you think that there's like another discardable like dark monster that you can even play with Grepher in this deck?
Like
Dasher.
Dasher.
Yeah, Dasher. That's interesting.
But nothing that's as good as Mally, Plague, and Necrogardna, I find. I mean, I'm sure if anyone in the comments can think of like some cool discard fodder for Grepher in this deck, I would love to hear it because I feel like I've tried everything and it just doesn't feel like it's as good as just playing an extra copy of Junk Synchron or something, you know?
Right. Like Dasher is like 4 instances where you've had all your stuff exhausted, but in those instances you're probably
Exactly
doing pretty good. Like often, if you've used your Plague, Necro, and Mally, so it's kind of like yeah. Might not be worth it.
He ends up synchroing with my Grepher and Herald to make Goyo, and he takes my last Treeborn, which I think is a fair play. Making sure I can't just like Caius him or something. And now it's going to be really hard to get access to Treeborn Frog or a way to get a monster on board, but I do have this Miracle Fusion. And this is kind of what I had mentioned is like, if I wanted to, I could tribute this for Mally and clear his board, but I don't really feel like the recruiter is a huge threat when he has 1 card in hand. So I end up summoning Swap. I attack with Ab-Zero into Goyo first because it gets the buff from the waters, and then I take my Treeborn Frog back just to make sure I'm doing the most damage. I figured this Nova Summoner, he can't use it to deal with this Ab-Zero, so I can just wait and keep the Ab-Zero on board. And he just sets passes. I have to do a little think here because Christia is just a card that can end this matchup. I have him fan his graveyard, and I'm like, if this is a recruiter that he has set, it puts him at 4, and then he can get Christie alive. He does end up using Crow on the Treeborn Frog, which I hate about because I didn't have a conversion for it anyways, and now he has no cards in hand. So what I do first is I attack what I assume to be a recruiter. It puts him at 3 fairies in grave. He gets Honest. And then in main 2, I feel a little bit safer to just go like, okay, now I'm going to tribute set. Use Ab-Zero to blow up the 2 monsters. He can't herald it because he has 0 cards. He has 5 fairies in graveyard, so he can't do anything. and then I end up drawing Caius, which is just so good. It is bottomless though, and then I have return. So this is surely a game.
Broken.
It's why I was saying it's my favorite card in the entire deck, because it just like turned this into like, okay, I win this turn now, and he's letting this go through, so I have to like actually think about what I'm making. But he has no cards in hand, he has no graveyard. I'm like, did he pitch like a Necro Gardener or something? But the only thing I need to do right now is just guarantee that I have enough damage, so I just go for the big synchro plays and Stratos, and I just attack for game. So that was a pretty fun matchup. There were like some cool interactions, but this one is probably the most important. It's the mirror match against regular hero frogs. I end up dust shooting him, which is just the best. I send back Gores, which I actually don't know if it's the right play. It lets me play more aggressively, but he ends up going Swap Frogs and Treeborn, attack for 1,000. He doesn't set the T-Roar, so the reason why I wanted to go for this play is because I can start going into like combos, just hopefully do a bunch of damage. And I'm thinking about like the cards he has in his hand. I can go for Greffer, pitch Mally, send Plague. So again, this is why I said like running 2 Swap Frogs in this build seems fine, because Greffer is sometimes it's just like a better opener, and it lets you go for these really, really good starting plays where I can just Mally, Plague Spreader, and go into a Synchro. Obviously, I know he has Brain Control because I shooted him, so the best play is always Thought Ruler. I would say into Frogs, you should almost always make Thought Ruler anyways, because of cards like Brain Control, Soul Exchange, any discard traps. It's just better than Stardust. He has Treeborn. I know he's going to make this play where he goes Brain Control for the Greffer, but I have my own Brain Control to deal with this, so I was okay with letting it happen. And he's going to do his dupe block. He makes the right play here. He could have ended on sub dupe, but he tributes the Subzitone for double dupe. And when you're in the mirror match, you should pretty much never leave Subzitone on board, because if they have Brain Control, which I did, I'd be able to steal it and use its effect. So definitely made the right play, just getting 2 dupes out. And I know that that's Threatening Roar as the back row. And I could potentially, like, my thinking, why I was doing a think for this long is I can Brain Control the Dupe Frog, summon my own Uni, and force out this T-Roar. And then also in main 2, Miracle Fusion his Dupe Frog away and, like, break his Dupe block. But it feels so risky into, like, him drawing something that could out my board. So I end up just summoning Unifrog, and I want to save this Brain Control. And the strategy here is like, if I can just attack direct for 400 and he has Caius or something, I can potentially just like Brain Control, and he's 1 Caius away from dying. So after doing this huge think, I'm like, I'm just going to summon Uni and attack. He does Threatening Roar that though, which I was shocked. I did not think he was going to flip that to stop the Uni from. And at that point, I was like,
might have forgotten that the Unifrog wasn't gonna actually get the effect there.
Yeah. So I was like stunned. He ends up having Dust Shoot, but at this point, he basically knows that this is game. Because he used the Threatening Roar, I could safely do this play, which is just... Actually, I don't know if I do it this turn. I think I have to, right?
This should be game, right? Brain, a dupe, miracle, and then just attack over the Unifrog, right? Attacking over the Unifrog. Oh wait, you have to kill the dupe first.
Yeah.
Summoning your own dupe, that's the key. Yeah. That's the key.
So he gets his search, but the Ab-Zero's buffed up now, so he made the right play, which is he just waited and made sure that I knew that I had to attack with the Ab-Zero. Otherwise, it wasn't game if I attacked with Thought Ruler and then debuffed by Ab-Zero. So definitely the right call, just saying like you have to play the cards first. But he goes turn 1, Infernal Prodigy, a card that I cut a long time ago for Vanities. Thankfully, I have that out with Smashing Ground, but my hand is looking sad. I got Double Miracle, Caius, Vanities, and Mali. So I'm like terrified. This is just not the hand you want to see. We do some passing back and forth. He summons Swap, starts chipping in, sets another back row, and I draw my Swap Frog, but he Water Arts at the perfect time. I was about to shuffle it into the deck. It goes to the graveyard, so thankfully we do that before I put it back. But yeah, my only good card in my hand. It turned on everything. He ends up going Heavy Storm because he knows my hand at this point. He knows I have no answers. So he pops his own Mirror Force and my Torrential. He's going to start poking in for huge damage. And yeah, this is definitely just the right play. Just start dealing damage.
Clock.
And I draw double Vanities, double Caius, double Miracle. So we end up going to game 3. And I get the exact opposite starting hand, which is the best opener, Stratos, 1-for-1 pitch Mali. So I talked about this in the deck profile. This is your best play. Go Mali effect to get Mali out. I'm going to do my combo. I believe I should use Swap Frog's effect to bounce Stratos to hand, because I don't have Unifrog anymore. So the best play is always just double dupe. Like I said in game 1, you never want to leave Substitoad out when you're in the mirror match. So I am guaranteed, like, I need to go into double dupe. I'm going to bounce the Stratos back because then I can search Ocean if I need to get Stratos to search that card for any reason. And my hand's looking pretty good now. I got Caius. Return is back. I drew it a lot this tournament, which I love because it just got to show off like how good that card could be. But it definitely did its job in a lot of these games. He has Infernal Prodigy again, and I was telling him, like, I feel like I hate Infernal Prodigy because I never open it, and then it's just bad for the rest of the game. But he was able to make use of it both times, which was really good.
When you open it, it's good.
Exactly.
It's definitely good when you open it.
My theory is, like, once you get the Treeborn Frog in the grave, it's dead for the rest of the game. So it's like you have to see it turn 1 or you usually can't do anything with it. But obviously he gets to go into his own dupe block. We were kind of talking about this. Is like, this is not even a scary board for Frogs because one Monarch just outs dupe block, and you can see that I have the Caius. So I end up going MST. I don't think I'm going to get a lot of value out of it, so I'm just going to, like, I know it's probably a discard trap. I'm just going to use it. And it's a Wing Blast onto my dupe frog. And we just have Caius banishing dupe frog. I'm going to attack his dupe frog, let him get his free swap frog or whatever. And then I pass. So just like that, both dupe blocks dealt instantly. He tributes for Vanity's Fiend, attacks dupe frog. I get my own swap. Right now, I think my only play is to crash into this Vanities. So I opt to Allure. Maybe I could draw something. I draw Karma Cut, Torrential. So really, really good. That Grepher wasn't doing anything. And it's also set up for return now, which is great. But at this point, I don't need to crash this Caius. I can just sit and wait. This Vanity is blocking his own Treeborn from coming back. So I just go Swap Frog, bounce the Caius so I can get value out of it, and just set the 2 back row that I drew into. So just showing off the strength of Allure. He ends up going Swap Frog, priority bounce his own Vanities, which was the perfect play because I had that Torrential set. And He's a really frog player, so that was definitely like really awkward for me. But thankfully I have follow up with Stratos, so super cool play. I usually don't see that happen.
Bouncing the Stratos early game is gonna pay dividends because it's just the open board pressure you need, and if like that's a discard trap he has set, it's like, okay, fine, you're gonna discard trap my Stratos, like.
Exactly.
And 18 is not trivial. That's like almost a fourth of the life.
Exactly. So Stratos puts in some work. He's gonna have to use this discard trap if he wants to get his Treeborn live. He just passes though. So I'm feeling like this game is close to being unlosable on my end because of the quality of cards that I have in my hand. So I just summon Ocean. I end up attacking into a Mirror Force, but I mean, you see I have Miracle Fusion, I have Return. I'm checking my Darks because I can potentially get Dark Arm live if I return and then get rid of the 2 Darks and set up that dad play. He goes Junk Synchron, summon swap, no priority. So once I figure out he's going into like a synchro play, this is just the best moment to use the torrential. Deal with the junk frog or junk synchron. I Raigeki break the set T-Roar because now I think I want to start using these like broken limited cards. I have Karma Cut to deal with his Treeborn Frog, which is why I love it in the mirror match. I end up going Miracle Fusion. And again, banishing Swap Frog, because if I bring back Greffer, I can Swap Frog, bounce the Mally to hand, use Greffer's effect to set up Dark Arm. So it's really important to know which waters you're going to banish for return. But otherwise, Ab-Zero hitting for 3k. He ends up having to soul exchange my Ab-Zero for Vanities. So really good 2-for-1 trade for me. And I end up drawing the Miracle. So it's like basically locked in at this point. But I believe it would have been game either way. But I end up going Miracle Fusion. And then just to play around Gores, I flip the return. And that is going to be GG's. If you thought the deck was cool, leave a like and comment if you have any suggestions for ways to improve on the deck.